Before we start today's video, I just want to say thank you for all the love and support you have shown on my little short film that I posted a couple weeks back. I was definitely not expecting it to be that well received so far, and I cannot believe it has reached over 1,000 views already. I've gained so many more subscribers on that one video alone, and I'm so happy you guys want to see more from me, so I'll definitely have more coming soon. Life has been really busy recently, and by the time May comes around, hopefully I'll have a better schedule so I can upload more consistently here on YouTube. And last week I also kind of messed up my arm, so that also kind of pushed me back from making any videos or even using my camera. But I'm all better now, and with that said, so for today's video I want to share with you why I made the switch from Canon to Sony, my experiences switching camera brands and upgrading my camera, and a pros and cons of each camera brand to see if you would lean towards one camera or another, and to help you decide, if you think you'd rather go towards Sony or Canon. Now of course there are many other great camera brands out there like Fuji, Panasonic, but I haven't been able to, actually try those cameras out, so I'm just going based off my experiences so far. Also, even though I don't own the R5, I will be talking about that in this video since I know a lot about that camera since I was deciding on maybe upgrading to that, even though I ended up going with the a7IV. So of course I first started out with the Canon EOS R back in 2020, and recently in 2022 I decided to switch to Sony and get the a7IV as my main hybrid body camera. If you did watch my short film, that was my first main work with the a7IV, and I'm really happy with how the footage turned out, as that was definitely a main reason for switching to Sony. So let's start out with why I made the switch. Well, first off, I finally considered Sony because they finally started adding a flip out screen to their newer bodies, as that's definitely a main necessity for me for the way that I work. I'll be talking more about the flip out screen in other sections of this video, but for these talking head portions or anything that I do by myself, I definitely needed a flip out screen. Now for the first reason for why I switched has to be because of how the files worked on older computers or on my MacBook Pro from 2019. Now I know my MacBook Pro really isn't that old, but comparing the way Sony and Canon files work on computers, especially older ones, Sony definitely wins by a long shot. Now unless you have anything from Apple that has the M1 chip in it or any of their newer, more expensive computers, anything from the R5 in its best settings possible that you can record in is definitely going to be a pain on your computer. I also didn't want to have to add creating proxies to my workflow, and the file formats that you get from the a7IV or FX3 or a7S3, they really work really well on your computer. Even though the files might be bigger, I'd rather have that than a slow working edit while I'm trying to get my videos done. Now also, my MacBook Pro isn't fully spec'd out to the max, and I didn't want to have to force myself to upgrade just so I can run those R5 files, because I know they're so heavy on your computer. Now really quick for why I decided to go for the a7IV over the FX3 or a7S3. Well, one, the FX3 and the a7S3 have been on back order for so long because of the chip shortage going on, because of the world. But two, even though I wanted to focus more on high quality videos, it's really nice to have a camera that has high quality videos and photography that is also really incredible. I still love photography, maybe not just as much as video, but I still would have wanted to get a second body where it could have been a main photography body and a main video body. So I guess I'll just wait on getting a main video body later on once I can, actually get an FX3 or, something like that. But the a7IV is really good on both sides, so I didn't make any mistakes choosing this camera to go with. Now another reason for why I switched to Sony was definitely for S-Log3, but in their newer bodies. It's incredible for how in their more affordable mirrorless cameras, you can get the dynamic range and cinematic look in S-Log3 without having to pay for a higher premium price in their more expensive cameras. The image you get out of these newer Sony cameras is really incredible, and it matches up pretty well with their cinema lineup. You don't get any more of that color shift you used to get with their older bodies, and color grading this footage is so much fun to do. Also, of course, Danny Gewirtz was another big reason for switching. I mean, the footage he gets out of his little FX3 is just so incredible. I had to just, get this myself. And as I said, this is a hybrid camera that is incredibly good at both photo and video. I'm gonna sneeze. And finally, the last reason was definitely the low light capabilities. Everyone should know by now how incredible Sony is at low light. I mean, basically our cameras can see better than our eyes do in the dark. But seriously, with the a7 IV having a base ISO at 800 and then 3200 as its second base ISO, it's great to have that versatility when I need it. And when I've been shooting with this camera, I haven't really needed to go past 3200 ISO. So I think that is a really good second base to have instead of like, you know, the FX3 or A7S III having that 12,800, which is crazy high. Don't get me wrong, those cameras might be better in low light, but for, you know, not having to go that far in the ISO range, I think this is a great camera to choose. Now, for my experiences switching from Canon to Sony. At first, it was definitely a bit of a weird transition, you know, going from Canon to Sony. You know, the menus are a bit different and, you know, things were a little confusing, but as I got used to it, like right now, I'm completely used to the menus. There's nothing wrong with how they are, and, you know, I'm lucky that I didn't have to go through that old menu system, and it really is no problem when you get incredible footage out of this camera. Also, with all the buttons that you can assign on this camera and, you know, create your own menu system at the beginning, you really don't need to go diving into the menus because everything's already preset for you. What I did kind of find funny though was within like the first 10 minutes of setting up the a7 IV, the camera actually did overheat on me. I was really surprised that it happened, but it's only because I didn't change that first setting that I should have done, which was the auto power off when it gets too hot. And just in case you're setting up your a7 IV and you haven't done this yet, here it is so you know where to look for it so you can switch it off. And then once you do that, I mean, I haven't had any problems overheating so far once I switched that setting. So I'll see, you know, maybe once it gets warmer, there'll be more problems. But for right now, I've loved this camera, every minute of it. Comparing that to the R5, you know, we hear all these problems with overheating with the R5, even with all the firmware updates that they've done. So I think if overheating is also an issue you're thinking about, I definitely think the a7 IV is better in my opinion if you can't get the FX3 or another camera that doesn't have any issues. Battery life has been pretty good so far with the camera, you know, shooting in 4K of course will drain your battery, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be. But the one thing I really don't like about this camera honestly is the low quality flip out screen. So the Canon EOS R, my first camera that I got back in 2018, has a better flip out screen than the a7 IV that came out in 2022. To me, that honestly doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, everything about this camera is really great, but the flip out screen is just something that, you know, it bothers me still even though I've been using this for a while. With Canon, with the EOS R, the flip out screen is really great. I can clearly see my images. They don't look blurry or, you know, lower quality. And when I'm shooting with this, sometimes I feel like my images aren't as good as they actually are while I'm shooting them until I get back on the computer and see for myself. But with that being said, I really do think that that little minor inconvenience isn't that big of a deal compared to everything else you get with this camera. And of course, the one thing people will talk about is the 4K 60p crop. And for me personally, I don't find that to be that big of a deal. And I think it's because with the Canon EOS R, I've been shooting, you know, mostly 1080p full frame, and 4K has always been cropped for me. So now, of course, I'm always shooting in 4K, but having that 60p crop, you know, it does bother me sometimes. I wish it was full frame, but, you know, I don't think it's that big of a deal as it's not too cropped in, and I think if you know what you're doing and you're creative, you can really do anything you want even though it's cropped. And now, here's what I think to be a pros and cons for if you're deciding to go for Sony, whether it's the a7 IV, FX3, a7S III, or any of those, versus if you were deciding to go for Canon, either the EOS R, R5, or R6. So I'm just going to read this off so I don't miss anything and you guys can get the full idea of what I think is good for each side. So for Sony, I would say if you prefer S-Log 3, file workflow is definitely better than the R5. And with Sony, you definitely get a more range and lens choices than you would with Canon. You know, you have Tamron and Sigma creating really good third-party lenses. And with Canon and the RF glass, I don't think there are any companies right now that have done that. I could be wrong, but even so, they're still very limited in their lens choices. Now, comparing the in-body stabilization between this and the R5, I definitely think this would win, because with the R5, I've seen, you know, in the wider lenses that there's a bit of a wobble, and I've had no problem with this as I've shot at 16 and I've seen nothing like that so far. Obviously, the low light capabilities of Sony is like unmatched. Overheating on Sony isn't as bad as it is on the R5, but maybe it is better on the R6 nice. And of course the R5C has a built-in fan, but you know, the batteries drain like crazy when you're shooting in, you know, those higher crazy settings. And the last thing is definitely no record limits on Sony, while the R5 still has a record limit, which I don't really understand. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know with the R there is a record limit, and that doesn't make any sense to still have, you know, now in 2022. I'm pretty sure the R5C doesn't have any record limits, but the R5 still does, and R6 and the R. Now these are the pros for Canon. If you prefer C-Log or C-Log 3, of course, the flip out screen is definitely better. Maybe in Sony for, you know, the A1 is better, but I'm not really looking towards that, and it's not a flip out screen. Canon still does have better menus, so I'll definitely give it that. And I don't know what it is, but I still do prefer shooting pictures on my Canon than I do with the Sony. Maybe it is because of the flip out screen, but I feel like the experience of shooting, you know, portraits or photography on Canon, I just prefer it more. I don't know what it is. It might just be a weird quirk with me, but I do like taking pictures more on Canon than Sony. But you know, Sony's great as it is, so it doesn't really matter. And I will say that the RF glass is definitely better quality, but it's more expensive and there's not that many choices like I've mentioned before. Also, I think I do prefer the Canon body over the Sony. I think the grip is just much better on here and it feels really nice in the hands. And I think that's pretty much it between Canon and Sony. Now I will say both systems are great and you can't go wrong with either one, and I haven't been able to try out, you know, other camera companies like, as I mentioned, Fuji or Panasonic. But with how good cameras are now, you really can't go wrong with any camera that has come out like since 2020 and after. If the camera you're thinking about getting did come out after 2020, it's probably good, and you just have to keep working on your skills to get better. I will say though, for Canon, I do think they tend to leave their filmmakers or, you know, people that want to focus more on video in the dust. Canon definitely seems more like a photography, camera focused brand, and if you really want to get into their higher quality videos, they're trying to like make you go towards their cinema line, but not anyone can just go out and buy a cinema camera these days, you know. They're still pretty expensive, I will say. And I think with Sony you get the best of both photo and video, but the videos you do get out of these cameras are truly incredible, and it really feels like you're shooting with the cinema camera but in a really small package. That's all for today's video. If you want to see more work I've done with the A7 IV so far, you can check out my Instagram or TikTok in the description below. If you've enjoyed the video, leave a comment down below saying what you're thinking of getting if you haven't decided yet, or what camera you already have that you really enjoy. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.